Hey there, this is Alex Kluge. I'm here from Toronto Home Experts, and I'm going to dive into the May 2022 Toronto real estate numbers, just to give you a sense of what's happening behind these numbers and also what we're seeing as active agents in the Greater Toronto area. So, before we start, just a reminder, we're going to be comparing the May 2022 numbers against the May 2021 numbers, and that'll give you a good sense of what's happened year over year. We're also going to dive into some of the other metrics that are a little bit more specific about what's happening today and look at some month over month trends, because that'll really give you a clearer picture in terms of actually what's happening and what direction we might be going in this market. Okay, so sales volume is a very interesting metric to look at, because when we look at this May, it was actually the second lowest May we've had on record since the stat was recorded by the Toronto Real Estate Board since 2002, I believe, was the first year started publishing these stats. So if we go back all the way the last 20 years, this is the second lowest one, which is pretty unusual for May. And actually, if you wonder what's the lowest May on record, it would be no surprise to anyone here, but May 2020, when the number was around 5,000. So we're just a little bit shy of that. So, anyways, saw like a pretty drastic reduction in volume, and I think partially that's a couple of things. A lot of these sales were brought forward earlier in the year. We saw like some pretty impressive volume in January, February, and March. April started being a little bit more normalized, and then May was really considerably lower. But again, I think that has to do with some macroeconomic factors, right? Like we saw rising interest rate environment in May. The Bank of Canada increased their overnight lending rate by 50 basis points. We also saw bond yields rise pretty substantially in May, which affects the fixed rate mortgage market. So I think that's partially what happened, and that really explains, what sort of the synopsis is, what's behind the sales volume. But that doesn't tell you the entire picture. Like you can't look at sales volume for 1 month and say, okay, like, oh, the market's slowing down. But you have to look at this metric along with a few others, which we're going to do shortly, to help paint a picture in terms of what's actually happening. So active listings are up relative to where they were last year, up by 26%. So for 1 month, it's really can't draw too much from this. But what I'm going to be looking for is where are we going to go pattern wise the next few months? Like how is June, July, and August going to compare versus last year? And if we're going to see a divergence, like more listings, less sales, that's going to be a concern for the marketplace, no question. So new listings, when we look at new listings for this month, they're actually on par to where we were last year. So, you look at active listings relative to new listings, it shows that this would tell me, when we're looking at the last two slides, that there is a little bit of a slowdown happening, and certainly we're seeing that outside the Toronto core, specifically in Durham region, Peel, Halton, and York regions as well. So that's a little bit happening out there first. But I'm going to dive into actually some of the more important numbers to look at, which I think right now is average price change, because that helps paint the picture a little bit more clearly. Average price. So, you look at year over year, last year to this year, we're up 9%, which, the grand scheme of things say, yay, that's amazing. But average prices actually declined, on a month over month basis, basically since February, which, everyone would call basically the peak. And this is for Toronto Real Estate Board. So this includes all the areas, not just Toronto, right? So, what's actually happening in the outskirts, as I mentioned, prices are declining, 905 region specifically, and in the 4016, the core, like the proper 4016, downtown, midtown, in North York, those pockets are incredibly resilient, which is great news. And actually, It's the only region within the Toronto Real Estate Board that has seen a month-over-month price increase, whereas every other region within Toronto Real Estate Board since May has actually seen a price decline, average price decline. Does it mean everyone's property in those regions has declined? No, but I'll get to some of the specifics shortly. So this is actually what I find fascinating when you're comparing January 2022 to May 2022 average prices. So if you compare Toronto, where we were early in the year, and we compare to where we were at the end of May, it's a pretty substantial increase, which is great. But we're not seeing that in any of the other regions. Like, look at Halton, Peel, York, and Durham. Durham's just getting absolutely the largest declines compared to many of the other markets that we're in right now. So the average price from decline from February, which we call it the peak, to May, which is this month or this past month, average prices have declined by 19%. Like, that is very significant. So you might wonder, like, well, why Durham? Like, what's happening in Durham to warrant like such a steep decline? And it's one of the things that, if you look at average prices from January 2020 to January 2020 to February 2022, right? So you look at basically pre-pandemic to call it like the height of prices so far this year. Prices in Durham increased by 87%. Like, that's not sustainable in a 2-year period. Like, that is unbelievable, has never happened in Toronto real estate. So we're just seeing a little bit of retracement, right? Like, that's what I'm seeing. And so people are saying, well, why is Toronto up and Durham's down? Well, if you look at January 2020 to February 2022, prices were only up by 37%, right? So, like, we saw an increase, which is, certainly a lot more normalized than we saw for Durham region. So I think, like, that's basically what we're seeing, is that there was like a mass, I shouldn't say mass, but like there was an exodus of people moving out of the city, due to lifestyle change because of the pandemic, and then now people are coming back to the city. So we're seeing the strength still happen in the downtown, midtown pockets are extremely strong. We're not seeing any declines there, but we're certainly seeing some weakness in the outskirts. So anyway, super fascinating by this stat, and great to see that Toronto holding strong. And I do think that's going to continue to happen throughout the rest of the year. We're going to see Toronto lead the way. If anyone watched the market prediction videos that I recorded in January, that's basically what I've been saying. I was saying that there was going to be a retracement in the 905, and we're going to see strength in the 416, and that's basically what we're seeing right now. So so one thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see this in large screen. I guess not. But actually, here we go. So this is actually a really interesting chart that goes through the average price through January, each January, leading up all the way to last January 2022. So you can see the blue line, which is the average price, and then we've got the orange line, which is the 12-month moving average, which is an average price trend. So one important thing to note here, and this is what I'm looking at, is the orange line is a moving average. So basically, like, it smooths out the the months and the changes over a 12-month lag. And anytime you see we go above, the average price goes above the average price trend, it tends to come back to the moving average. And that's been fairly consistent, since 94, right? So if you look at pointing to, 2017, if you remember, we saw a huge spike really, really early in the year, and all of a sudden we saw retracement, the latter half of 2017, and it recovered, right? Like, things recovered, but it it recovered to the average price trend, which is the moving average. So if you fast forward to what we're seeing in 2022, we're seeing average prices, they skyrocketed really from 2021 into 2022, and we're now seeing a little bit of retracement back to the moving average. So I think we can expect that moving forward for the rest of the year, a little bit of price softening, a little bit of retracement, and back to more in line with moving averages. So, this is certainly not calling for. I'm not calling for a market crash or anything along those lines, but I'm just saying like there is going to be some softening that's going to be that we are seeing in the outskirts, and we're seeing also too sales volumes be affected by that. And so, what does that mean? Like price. Properties that are properly priced and well presented are still selling. So, that means staging, that means, top-notch photos and video and virtual tools and all that stuff. So right now we're going above and beyond for all of our seller clients just to make sure that it's presented in like a 10 out of 10, because if you're like a 7 out of 10 or like a 8 out of 10, even like in a bull market, when things were going, multiple offers, things were selling super quickly in 6-7 days, you could get away with things. But now you've really got to be the best looking house on the block, or you got to be the best looking condo in the building. So we're making every effort to make sure that happens, and we've actually had a lot of success with that. But the point is, this is a transitioning market, and we're adjusting and we're making sure our clients are benefiting from that. So okay, so days on market, no surprise, given what we've been talking about, a slight uptick, like one day, really, year over year, doesn't make a huge difference. But I have a feeling that we're going to see an increase moving forward, ever so slightly for June throughout the summer, right, to back to September. By then, we don't know what's going to happen by the fall, but most likely with rate increases and perhaps a softening economy, we might see a little bit more of an uptick there as well. So months of inventory, interestingly, is actually down. 1.2 to 1 doesn't really say too much. We're still very much, this would tell me that we're in a seller's market. But as months go on, because this is a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator, as volume drops, we're going to see months of inventories rise. So that's something that I expect to see throughout, June through August, to see that number increase relative to where we were last year. So anyways, thank you so much for watching our video. We hope you found this informative. Like always, anytime you have questions, feel free to reach out to any of our social channels. Smash that like button. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next month. Thanks again.